Hello, Kaiju fans. This is Joe, your regular co host. Tonight, I am joined with Dr. Steve Rawle, Associate Professor in Media Production at York St. John University. This is episode 106, and you are in for a treat. So, Dr. Rawle, or can I call you Steve?
You absolutely can call me Steve, yes.
Awesome. So, we are here to talk about your book, which I have read. It is titled Transnational Kaiju, Exploitation, Globalisation, and Cult Monster Movies. That is a mouthful, but it is a great book. I have read it. So we're going to dive right into how it got started. One doesn't necessarily just start with kaiju. So how did you get on that page?
No, thank you for having me. It's
Oh,
wonderful to
yeah.
be on. And great out talking about this book and talking about kaiju. It's fantastic. How did I get started with kaiju? Slowly, I think, like probably a lot of British fans. Um, I don't think we were quite as exposed to kaiju movies when I was younger. I'm uh, in my mid 40s. I'll give that away early on. So I don't think we were quite exposed to things quite as much as say American audiences were. So it was a little bit slow for me. I remember watching them on Channel 4 in the mid 90s, and then probably getting into it in the 2000s as better DVD releases came along. And I just kind of got obsessed with it through kind of the last 10 years as I started looking particularly at kind of global trends in particularly kind of exploitation cinema. Around the early 2010s, I read a lot about Takashi Miike's movies. And I got really fascinated by Japanese movies after they left Japan. Um, and kaiju just seemed the perfect thing to kind of marry this interest with um, a really fascinating genre that has a life beyond the borders of Japan, but is so thoroughly Japanese. And so I guess it's a paradox in that case, isn't it? You know, it's kind of these movies circulated so well and were adopted in so many different cinemas, but they still remain so Japanese at their core.
There we go. So if we can ask a cheeky question, what's your favorite kaiju?
Ah, that is so hard. That's so unfair.
It's like asking your
um,
favorite Pokemon at this point, isn't it?
it is, yeah. Megalon.
Megalon, good
I
choice.
have a
50th
horrible,
anniversary coming up next year.
yeah, I know. I just have I have such a soft spot for that film. It's
Uh,
kind of, I mean, it says it in the beginning of the book that I've not quite been able to convert my wife into a fan of Godzilla versus Megalon. Um,
So, strangely enough, that was the first film that I subjected my partner Dawn to. She is soon to be my wife,
uh,
and she holds an equally dubious opinion of that film. But
that's
to be fair, we threw him in the deep end of the pool there, didn't we?
that is true. That is true. Didn't kind of ease in through, 1954 and even although my wife did love Shin Gojira, um, to her credit, but the charms of Godzilla versus Megalon have never quite broken through that barrier.
It has a lot of something, that's for sure.
Yeah. Plus,
So,
I kind of feel sorry for Megalon as well. You know, it's kind of it's looked upon as kind of the worst of the series, and so I kind of just feel sorry for them.
it's the worst, huh? Oh, I thought that was reserved for Terror of Mechagodzilla, but I'll take it. So, is that your favorite kaiju film? In addition to having your favorite kaiju in it?
No, I think I'm old school, and the best one is the first one. The first Godzilla film, I think, is the best of all kaiju films. Just it's the one, certainly, writing about these films globally, it's just the one you keep coming back to. It's the one that sets up the template, sets up the way these films are made, and the core themes of them. You just come back to it. You can't get over it, I think.
There you go. I was going to say recently, I will agree that Shin Godzilla is my favorite, but working in corporate bureaucracy, that hit close to home.
Is it
Some of
too
those
true
things.
to you?
Yeah, it was kind of like laughing whilst crying at the similarities. It's like you could really see how it is a satire, disguised as a kaiju film.
Yeah.
So, one of the great things, we'll kind of dive into the book here. Transnational Kaiju, Exploitation, Globalism, and Cult Monster Movies. Again, that is the title. It is on Amazon. This is very refreshing. This is a fantastic book from the standpoint that it isn't regurgitating the same information. There have been so many kaiju books that just talk about a director's stance, how the film was made, and what the film went on to do. So that's been done before. It keeps getting done, and many magazines and blogs and podcasts, we're no exception. We've done it too. Everybody likes to hear the sound of their own voice, but a lot of it's just the same. But this is a different concept and a different way of approaching the material. So, what is transnationalism as an expert,
Yeah.
and why is it an interesting topic?
Okay. Um, to kind of start with some of the things you're saying, I didn't think I had anything else to add there. I've read so much great stuff by fan scholars. I couldn't have done this without, the work by people like Steve Reifel and Ed Godziszewski. It's impossible to add anything more. So I kind of thought it was pointless to add that when that great work was there. Those books need to come back into print, I think is kind of the thing. But transnationalism was my take on it because I fixated, and I spoke just a little bit to JD Lees about this as well, about this word kaiju. That most of the genres we have English names, or they're translated from English, but they're essentially the same name. They're the musical, the Western, and they flow around the world globally. But kaiju's gone the other way, and it's come to name a genre globally through its Japanese name. And I think that's really interesting. So transnationalism speaks to the ways in which things move across borders. Essentially, it's kind of a way of thinking about globalization and how globalization has impacted us. In cinema, it's right from its inception. We all start watching movies from around the world. All kinds of countries start producing stuff and they get into export markets. And so in one sense, it's about how connected we are, how so many people cross borders, from tourists to migrants, and we tell stories about them. So in a certain kind of way, it's about thinking about flows of culture, flows of money, flows of people, and how we're all interconnected. And it's a better word than global, because it means that the meanings and the things that are important about nations still remain. Doesn't get rid of being Japanese or being British or being American, but there are much more interconnections between those. And they're not neutral, they are politically charged sometimes. Japan's kind of relationship with the rest of East Asia is tense, I think is a simple way of putting that. But those lines of culture end up in different ways, in different movies. So I was down at a conference earlier this week, and having listened to lots of presentations about really interesting and really gory horror films, as ways of kind of de-westernizing a genre, to make it more global, to make it less Americanized. I then spoke about War God, and how War God is the sort of adoption of Japanese tropes, but in a very Chinese story, but with special effects by Koichi Takano. So that kind of flow of individuals and this kind of mashing up of two nations' cultures is kind of that's at the core of transnationalism for me. I don't know, that's kind of rambly way of putting it, I think.
So, to ask a couple obvious questions here. So, folks that are listening to this podcast or thinking about picking up this book, you're saying that kaiju is a term that these films forced into the global market that never really left them. It was iconic in its own right. That is the way that they were labeled. To those that would say, well, it's a monster movie, for those of us that call them monster movies, does that mean how would you address that question in that, well, we call it a monster movie, or like in the States,
Yeah.
my parents certainly called them monster movies for better or for worse. I found the term kaiju in the 2000s. And I think that it really took off with Pacific Rim. I think
Yeah.
Pacific Rim had a big handle in pushing that word. So, how would you respond to that line of thought?
I think it's fair. I think it's a way of talking about a particular set of monster movies that have a particular figure, which generally is daikaiju, is those giant big beasts. I think in the Japanese term, I kind of trick it a bit in the book, maybe where I talk about half human. That's definitely a strange beast, but it's not daikaiju.
Mhm.
Um, but is strange enough to be encompassed there. But I think for me, it's so much playing around with the King Kong motif, and King Kong is so fundamental to what becomes the kaiju movie that there are connections there. But certainly, say the Blob, which I know you've been talking about recently, we wouldn't necessarily see as a kaiju movie, but we would see it as a monster movie.
Yeah, I asked that question partially because we take a very broad scope in this podcast because it's such a niche fandom. We
Yeah,
don't want to we don't want to kick anybody out for just not believing just so. So just getting it clear. I mean, whilst monster movies and kaiju movies are very closely related, it's the large giant monsters, in particular, I guess you could say, structuring of a film that
yeah,
leads it to be a kaiju film.
yeah. There's a
That's
lot of
that's what's
there's a lot of rampaging, I think is
yes,
is the thing.
a lot of running of the masses, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And something, I guess something like them, say, with its giant ants, they're not anthropomorphized in the way that kaiju are. The
Yeah,
distinctive personalities of kaiju, I think, are really important. So once they're either um, many in number, 1998 Godzilla, you know, those little Godzillas, you've kind of lost the connection to kaiju there. These are just little monsters running around. They're not really kaiju.
I
Um,
remember that part in your book. Yeah,
yeah,
you did mention the good old Gino, so
yeah.
that was
Something's gone wrong there.
so picking up on Gino and how it is kind of in essence a takeoff from the Beast of 20,000 Fathoms,
Yeah,
which is a giant monster, which has running of the masses, which I would argue that it has quite a bit of personality. It's a great Ray Harryhausen monster, and it did
yep.
have an impact on the original Godzilla being put out. Where does that rank in terms of being a kaiju versus just a monster movie or a large monster movie?
Uh, there's probably two things there. One is the monster, like you say, has a lot of charm to it. Um, and secondly, it's the first movie to have, certainly the first movie I can find that has the word kaiju in the title once it's translated into Japanese. So that word starts to take hold. Um, and it has those modern themes of nature versus science, and kind of it's about crazy mad science, and what that does to us, which is generally to cause our doom, unless we can find better science to kill it, of course.
Which usually ends up being a detriment as well.
Yeah,
So yeah, I was just curious about those things. They are explained in your book. You do go over that for anybody who, immediately is just like, well, wait a second. I can think of like a dozen different examples, that like flow against that logic. It is addressed in the book, which is great. So one of the things that you speak at length in the book, and I think you've already touched on it here, is the original Gojira film.
yeah.
So when you were writing this book, how did you keep it from just becoming a Godzilla book? Because I think that would have been a very easy trap to fall into.
Yeah, and when I was originally pitching it to the publisher, the reviews did say, "How does this not become a Godzilla book. Um, and it is important. It is foundation. I think almost every um, Godzilla movie is mentioned or referenced at some point in the book. They just come up. They're so fused. They are. We use the term texts. They're
Yeah,
foundational. They're the myth that we keep going back to. Um, so it had to get beyond that. And there's great scholarship about the Godzilla films already. And again, like some have said, some of the production histories, I didn't think I could add anything. So don't bother.
yeah.
Um,
That ground's been tread over.
reference it, and then kind of get beyond it. But it's so important. We just got to keep coming back to it. And I think one of the things I also wanted to do was to kind of get outside. We like to think about the cinemas, particularly in the West. We like to think about national cinemas in the same way we think about French cinema, say. It's all about classic auteurs um, and I wanted to big up Ishiro Honda as well as the kind of originating auteur of these movies. I know there's Tsuburaya and Tanaka as well, but Honda is the kind of classic auteur of these movies. And after Rifle and God Suzuki's brilliant biography, the ways in which Honda's humanism is ripped through these films is important. So I wanted to give him kudos as being a kind of father of this genre, as much
So
as
when
he
you
was a
talk,
reluctant father.
yeah, I was going to say I think that he imagined his career going in a different direction
Yeah,
prior to Godzilla,
very
and
much so. Yeah,
there were painful attempts to get back on track. However, the public wants what the public wants. So when you mention things like humanism in his productions, for those of us who aren't necessarily as familiar with filmmaking terms or plot devices, what are you referencing? What are you meaning?
his deep passion for humanity. This was a man deeply committed to peace. And somebody who'd seen the worst of the world as well.
Yeah.
And so committed to peaceful coexistence. Which runs through. Although as violent as these films are, they come back to Honda's vision of peace. And I think that's really important to acknowledge in how we think about that. And then once we've got that origin, for me, it's about how we go out and how we see that in different ways, in different cinemas, in different nations.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong here because it's been quite an early morning for Joe. But my favorite film, Terror of Mechagodzilla, that was a Honda movie,
Mm,
and I always really enjoyed Titanosaurus in that film because it's a peaceful dinosaur,
yeah,
but oh, he'll whoop you. It's just one of those things. But I always liked like the reluctant antagonist or the tragic antagonist. And I think Honda brought a lot to that. It was never necessarily that something was evil by nature. It was something that just was,
yeah.
and was trying to get everything back on track. So we've talked about how it didn't just devolve into a Godzilla book. Um, you do put in a lot of great anecdotes and you do throw in some of the plot. So while someone is reading this book, it isn't like you'll reference a film and not explain what the plot was or explain what was necessarily going on, with the directors and everything at the time. So it's great to have that bit of just knowledge in it. So like entry level fan, it's an advanced topic, but an entry level fan into the kaiju genre can read the book and go, okay, never heard of that particular film, but I'm with you. So I appreciate that, like you threw those in there. But again, for myself, if I was writing a book on this topic, I would quickly fall into the pit trap of talking about my favorite films or getting off topic on for me at least, it would have been a particular design aspect or a practical effect that was really fabulous in
Yeah.
said film. So with regards to transnationalism and keeping that topic at the forefront, how did you prioritize that over writing what I would call as a fan the fun stuff? So how did you manage to like meld those two? Transnationalism may be your fun stuff, but as a fan of the films, I would have gotten completely stuck in and
Yeah.
done like a chapters like, did you see Godzilla's dorsal plates in this film? Man, they were wicked. So how do you keep on track and keep the fandom aspect of your relationship with this genre separate from creating a
It's
really, how should we say this, a really informative book on a different, well, not necessarily a different topic, but exploring that topic through kaiju?
it's my academic training, stay on topic, but try to hope it's not too boring. Um, Try to make sure it's not full of jargon. And try to keep that. There were
That was
difficulties with,
something I noticed actually. I am very against jargon. I feel like jargon was invented to keep regular people from becoming academics.
yeah, I call it, dead French
Gatekeeping.
guy theory, that kind of stuff, as little of that as possible. There are lots of academics that hate that as well. I won't say who, because we're recording, but um, yeah, there's a lot of kickback in that to actually write, and we want to be public academics. We want to be public scholars and be able to engage with the broader world rather than sit in ivory towers and write obscure, dense, unreadable text. Um, so it's great to know it's readable beyond a really small audience. Um, my first book didn't even sell 100 copies. It was so niche.
But you wrote a book, which is farther than most people get. So
That is
don't down
true.
it.
That is true. Thank you. I appreciate that as well. I had to make tough choices in what to leave out and what to focus
Oh,
on.
you've just got me with another question in the back of my head now.
Like I say, I was talking about War God at a conference earlier in the week, and it doesn't even get a sentence in the book. It's just mentioned and moved on. I think in all the kind of recycling of footage and things like founding of Ming Dynasty. And these are now all the threads that I'm starting to work on. Like I could have talked about Latitude Zero more in the book. And now I kind of want to go and write something about Latitude Zero as a kind of wild transnational movie from the end of the 60s, with all its kind of crazy, colorful design, bizarre performances of Cesar Romero and Joseph Cotton. It's lovely for me. There's a direct link between kaiju movies and Citizen Kane. That's probably my kind of slightly rebellious academic thing that I want to match the really highbrow seeming stuff with the really kind of lowbrow seeming stuff because there's value in all of it.
Okay, so now I have two questions here. So first of all, what is the thing that tugs at your heartstrings that got put on the chopping block for the book?
The Heisei movies, maybe. I don't think I really spoke about them enough.
There wasn't much about them, to be fair,
Yeah,
compared to like Showa stuff. I think that you
yeah,
went into Showa quite heavily.
yeah.
But and how did you pronounce that as an academic?
Sure.
No, it's not Showa,
Yeah.
but the other one,
Heisei.
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 Okay, so there we go. You are an academic. Heisei. We're going to use that as the baseboard now
I'm
for
probably
the
wrong. My
podcast.
Japanese is terrible, so I'm probably wrong.
Yeah,
Um,
well, you're talking to an American,
okay.
but a Midwestern American at that. So, all right. So yeah, the Heisei movies. That is a bit of a blow. I think all of the kaiju films that came out of that era, I can't think of really a bad one. I think Godzilla versus Space Godzilla is much maligned,
Yeah.
but even then, I love that cute little gibbering baby Godzilla or little Godzilla. I think that's awesome. I mean, it had its moments, but I think that was great. The Gamera films. Those are fantastic. So
The Mothra 90s films as well. That so
some of
many.
them, Mothra 90, some of
I
them.
kind of- I think it's the kind of environmental angle, but I think those movies are really dealt with well in Sean Rhodes and Brooke McCorkle's book,
Yeah.
Japan's Green Monsters, isn't it? I think that's a really good book. So again, there are things I don't necessarily need to get into because I think they're covered really well elsewhere. Um, and maybe Minoru Kawasaki's movies, um, which are kind of deal with them in the conclusion is kind of, maybe they're more Japanese and less transnational. Um,
So for those of us who aren't as familiar with that director, you ramble off a few titles.
Calamari Wrestler, not a kaiju movie, but a movie I love. And Executive Koala.
I'm looking that movie up the second we're
Uh,
done with this interview.
Executive Koala is just a great film about,
That sounds like it could be like a series and be amazing.
yeah, fantastic. And it's Kaiju Mono, isn't it? His kind of kaiju wrestling film. Um, and he did he do the Girara sequel, Monster X at the G7, if I'm remembering that right.
I haven't personally seen that film, so I will pass rather than misinform. But yeah, so in other words, we didn't retread ground. So if something feels like it's lacking, it's because it's been so covered in other text.
Yeah, well, covered so well. I don't think I need to create. The academics are always arguing with each other, but I don't think I need to argue with Sean and Brooke.
Yeah, you can write something different, and there will be no one in the room to argue with you.
Yeah,
There we are.
totally.
So you mentioned earlier highbrow cinema. You mentioned Citizen Kane, which, all the rosebudding aside, I found a little bit dull, if I am going to admit. So when we talk about highbrow cinema, just to give our listeners and potential readers of this book an idea, what do you consider like cinema that is like true art form? What are like two films you would go to?
Uh Andrei Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev is just a wonderful, wonderful film. Um, I think it's really
Why
tough.
is it?
The other part of me wants to say uh, Flash Gordon, mostly because I love that film from when I was a kid. Um, I've always done this thing where like I'll talk about one really highbrow art movie and then I'll talk about something which is
Well,
kind
no,
of
that's really good.
considered illegitimate. It's an unfair thing to talk about kind of highbrow, lowbrow distinctions, but
Films
cinema is so
exist.
wonderful to me because it's got all these things.
Films exist to invoke emotion and entertain.
Yeah,
And you can do that very subtly and get a great response, which I feel is what a lot of art house cinema is considered, highbrow, if you want to call it that. And then there are filmmakers that want to have fun and want to bring the audience on them, and there's no obscurity with what is trying to be accomplished. And I feel like those are the films that don't get as much respect, to use a word. So what you've done there is you've described, I think, two movies that fit into those slots, in my opinion. So for myself, when I think of um like I'll choose two black and white films that are not kaiju films here. So Ikiru,
yeah.
that film will kick you in the gut.
Oh,
Oh, that's a bad analogy for that film, isn't it? That film will make you feel so bad,
yeah.
but at the end you'll be like happy, ugly crying. And I think that that's a truly wonderful film. It's a Kurosawa film.
Yeah.
Look it up, folks. It's one of those films. I feel like it could almost be like a Christmas film in a way,
Kind of.
because
Yeah.
it makes you feel like thankful for what you have, and like that you can push things. I think
Mm.
that's similarly to Shin Godzilla, although not a satire. That is about bureaucracy and getting things done. Um, so that would be like, I guess you call it a slow burn.
Yeah.
And then another film, which I positively love, and it will make me cry every time I watch it, ugly cry, is It's a Wonderful Life. If you haven't seen that film, you're really missing something. So, yeah, I feel like when you're talking about art house cinema, or, like when you're talking about really highbrow cinema, there's films like Ikaru, which will absolutely astound you with the portrayal of the characters, how it's written, the pacing, and just the overall plot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very simple concept. And then you have similarly a movie that is well written. It has iconic portrayals of characters, I would even say. It has um it has a plot which again I feel is pretty simple. I mean, there's otherworldly beings in it, but like considering the time of year that the film revolves around and what we're discussing, I mean, like it's not necessarily overly dramatic with those roles, but I feel like while It's a Wonderful Life gets that iconic status,
Mm.
it wouldn't be considered highbrow cinema like Ikaru would.
No, no. And I don't think Capra was given his due as an artist. The Pottersville sequence in It's a Wonderful Life, where the movie flirts with such darkness, is an amazing sequence. And I don't think I think so much of It's a Wonderful Life is kind of, oh, yeah, it's the schmaltzy Christmas movie, but um that kind of, it's a film noir sequence in the middle is the best way to describe it, I think.
Yeah, it is. And it's just the end. Like you go from hope and feeling good to feeling like abysmal, like in the pit of your gut. And like I feel like I don't want to spoil elements of It's a Wonderful Life, but I
I
feel
know, and
like
people can watch it soon. I mean, we're in
yeah,
November, it's practically
I feel
Christmas.
like
Watch
if
it
I give
now.
away anything of It's a Wonderful Life in this fandom, like I would legitimately be spoiling it for some people. But there's a part in the middle where something is forgotten and or misplaced, I guess you could say, and you're just I remember sitting there watching it going, no. And then someone finds it and you're like, not there. And like it really takes you down only to bring you back up at the end
Yeah.
too. But there's like a legitimately horrible, like guilty, even though there's not necessarily guilt to feel with it, because it's not necessarily like one person's loss, it's an entire community's loss in that film. And so, like again, there's a lot of parallels between the two films. Ikaru, you have a person whose triumph occurs at the end of their life, but if that person hadn't been there, it would have been the community's loss,
Mm.
even though it wasn't overtly stated that that person had such a huge impact in the community. But in a lot of ways, it serves almost as a precursor to It's a Wonderful Life, in that a lot of like, if you take one person out of the equation, what would all these other people's lives be like without that person? And I think, yeah, there's a definite argument for what constitutes highbrow cinema and what constitutes enjoyable. So, I mean, not that they can't both be enjoyable, but one certainly strives more for the overt enjoyment.
Yeah.
And
It's such a kind of false distinction,
yeah, and
a
I feel
really
like
elitist
I
distinction.
feel like there are a lot of, what do you want to call it, institutions that promote that separation between them. And they're as famous as the Oscars in the United States. And I think that it's just prevalent across whatever film rating bodies that you see, because everybody wants to appear the intelligent. And I think there's like, oh, have you seen this subtle film that me and only two other people know about? It's really good. You'll like it, but it didn't, like have millions of people saying it was awesome all over the place.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is important to get those things, like understood. And again, this comes through in your book, I feel, at several points, that these films were not made necessarily to be those kind of art films,
No.
but they do have an art unto themselves, which lots of people appreciate. And then that's what's caused them to become transnational. That's why they themselves are so iconic, that they've gone across those, because however many times another like production company outside of Japan has tried to replicate the formula, it's not quite the same. So Dino De La, or not Dino De Laurentiis, Eugene Laurie,
Yeah.
he is, I've talked about him multiple times in the podcast, but I think it is absolutely hilarious that we have Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, then we have Godzilla, and he's like, oh, that's a great concept. And then he makes Gorgo, but Gorgo's nowhere near as iconic as so many Godzilla films. And whilst Gorgo is a fun movie, it doesn't have the X factor, whatever that is, the charm, the schlock, the overly anthropomorphized giant lizard, whatever it was. It seemed too respectful, and yet not respectful enough to the source material. And I feel like he's such a great example, because again, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms in so many ways inspired so many different pictures. But even though he was potentially one of the great inspirations for what would become the genre, he couldn't nail it when he tried it.
No,
Would you agree?
I Gorgo is a kind of movie with lots of charm again. I think there's lots of movies with lots of charm, but does the monster really nail it?
Well, no, I don't think the monster really nails it. But when I had a VHS of Gorgo that I wore out. I mean, like it's one of the few, films that made it into Midwestern USA that Joe could get his grimy mitts on. But I don't think I necessarily watched that film because I was drawn to it. I watched it because it was there.
Yeah.
And as a person living in the United Kingdom now, Gorgo makes a lot more sense culturally for me. I can see why a lot of different things were done, like people going underground in London to the underground,
Yeah.
and hiding out there. The way that the military is portrayed, the idea of having the offspring of this giant amphibious death lizard just carted around Piccadilly Circus, like nothing wrong could happen here. Come on. I feel like there are a lot of, what should we call it? There are a few inside jokes there, but it's not going to have certainly a Godzilla versus Megalon status.
No.
But even if you look at it from a more serious note, from films of a similar time, it's not going to have a Monster Zero vibe, because it doesn't have that global approach. It doesn't have, like, Terror of Mechagodzilla was one of the darker Showa films. Even though it was dark tonally, Gorgo has dark moments, and it is actually a darkly lit picture. I think that the latter half of the film is just scarlets and dark tones, but it doesn't reach that point. And I don't think that there's been a movie that's really come close. I mean, Pacific Rim we're calling it kaiju. I mean, like, this is your transnational concept to the core, really,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
Guillermo del Toro did with
Well, yeah,
Pacific Rim. And
appropriation, mashup, kind
yeah,
of
and then
partial
like
remakes. Yeah,
we're gonna throw a bunch of different things into it, but the kaiju don't feel goofy. They don't have that rock'em sock'em robot feel. That's certainly what they do. And lots of kaiju folks and fans loved that film. But for myself, it still felt like it was missing an element. Like the third act of that film felt like it was missing something. And I feel like a lot of the kaiju films that I watched growing up, they were more subtle with their third act. Like, yeah, we all knew it was going to end up with a giant rubber suited slugfest. Like, that's why we fast forwarded it to the like end of all of those VHS tapes. But with Pacific Rim, it was this grand climactic finale, with like multiple monsters fighting. We had a like destroy all monsters type, like giant robots versus multiple giant monsters, epic boss fight, all of this. We went into the other dimension. We blew stuff up. I'm apologizing to all the people who haven't seen Pacific Rim yet because I'm totally spoiling the climax of the film for you. I'm sorry. It's been a decade.
yeah.
But
We won't spoil the sequel. Then we'll just kind of
the sequel was
if
spoiled
they
because it was
couldn't watch it
made.
anyway.
Sequel was spoiled because it was made. But I'm sorry, John Boyega. But it just didn't reach that. And what you go over in the book, and it is a uniquely Japanese concept, really. It may not have necessarily been a Japanese concept inspired wholly by Japanese art, but when they took it and ran with it, everyone afterwards couldn't really necessarily replicate the formula. And I think that's one of the great things that I took from your book.
Yeah.
Am I
Of
wrong
course,
on
there are
that?
all those articles about how Pacific Rim gets kaiju wrong and kind of empties out its metaphors um and doesn't kind of like what do the monsters mean in Pacific Rim?
They're just a means to an end. That's what they
Exactly.
are.
Um, that couldn't be more a transnational movie, Mexican director, multinational cast, shot all over the world, money from here, there, and everywhere, and then kind of
Mostly Chinese production studios, but yeah,
pretty much. More so the sequel. Again, we won't, I won't spoil it. I won't talk about it. Um,
we won't spoil this podcast by talking about it.
okay. The kind of in the utopian idea that we all work together to overcome these monsters, but the monsters are kind of just there.
I think,
They're a
yeah.
vehicle to tell that other story.
And one of the things that I I really enjoy about the original Gojira is that we didn't really win. I mean, at the end of that film, you feel like everybody lost.
Yeah.
And in subsequent Godzilla films, you don't beat Godzilla or you don't like defeat the kaiju because in concept, that is nature you are going against. And there's no winning against that
I think
beast.
Roland
So,
Emmerich will argue with you there. It's pretty easy to kill.
but did he make a kaiju film?
No, he didn't.
There we
He made
go.
a soggy mess.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a soggy mess. I do. I actually remember that film because I went and saw it with my friends for like my birthday. So I had like Godzilla themed birthday. And as a kid that grew up in like the 90s, like we're getting a CGI Godzilla. Independence Day guys made it. Like very American portrayal there of young Joe. But I remember going and seeing it with them, and they all came out of the film razzed. Like they were just so like, oh, that was awesome. And I remember my father, who begrudgingly would probably admit that it was he who was responsible for my kaiju fandom. I think it was always probably one of the great mistakes in his fathering career. It's just like I totally derailed Joe's whole plot of life by showing him these films. But I remember my father because Mighty Joe Young, which was by Disney, came out at roughly the same time. We watched Mighty Joe Young, and then we watched the Godzilla film. And my father, I think it was always just a way of getting my back up, or like poking fun at me, because I would always react and I'd always bite on this, that King Kong beat Godzilla. So when the Kong movie came out, Mighty Joe Young, and then we saw Godzilla, he said, I really enjoyed that movie. I think I like that movie more. It felt like a hollow win, because I'm like, that wasn't Godzilla. Because he died. You can't, I mean, my favorite, I guess I have two favorites, but they're ironically back to back. There's Terror of Mechagodzilla, and then there's Godzilla 1985, or Return of Godzilla. And in Return of Godzilla, I love the tone of that film, because it is made quite clear there is no stopping Godzilla. And that is one of the best concepts. I'm really glad that Toho took that forward, that there is no stopping him. You can get in the way, but he is the irresistible force and the immobile object. You're not stopping him. So to have Godzilla 1998 have him killed by an F-18, granted, I think it took like two or three, direct
Yeah, takes a
hits,
couple of goes, doesn't it? Uh,
but
once with the bridge,
it's
yeah.
and a sub. I mean, like,
Yeah.
let's face it, the iguana held its own against the United States military. There are nations that can say that didn't do that, but I feel like, yeah, it was that lack of an unstoppable force that really gave it. So to use another kaiju, along the similar vein, so we'll talk about the Heisei Gamera films for a second, which, again, hardcore fans of just about any kaiju filmography will always revert back to those Gamera films as being golden examples of where to set the bar. So Gamera in those films, he is not invincible, despite the original film's name. I mean, you can hit Gamera, he does bleed, but what makes the film have that sense of danger is the Gauss. And the Gauss, they start out small and they start out manageable, but there is kind of like a J curve to how dangerous they become, and that's just how long you leave them alone. So in the very human element of faffing around and deciding what to do, you give the Gauss their opening to reproduce asexually, which, now that I think about it, I think asexual reproduction became a thing in the late 90s for monsters. But the Gauss are what drives that home. And over the course of the Gamera trilogy, the first you have Gauss, the second you have Legion, and then the third you have Iris. Now, I would argue that Iris had the potential to become the most dangerous creature in that universe, because it was devastatingly intelligent, manipulative, had a slew of great abilities. But it's the end of that film where the original antagonist is given its due credit. You see Gamera, wading off into the destruction because he can't fly away from the city. He has to wade through the center of town, to pick a choice phrase from a song. But you see the hundreds of Gauss converging on Gamera, and you realize that it's again, like nature, you're not necessarily going to beat it, but it's just when you leave your problems alone, they reach a state to which you're not going to be able to cope with them. And even if you're a Gamera. So I feel like, again, being able to defeat a kaiju, I think part of that, or unless you're a kaiju yourself, you're not beating a kaiju. I feel like that is a hallmark of the Japanese films. But argue with me if I'm wrong. I just monologue there. I could practically be a
No, no,
supervillain.
I completely agree with you. Because of the forces that are behind these things. They're nuclear bombs. They're now, I guess, in a contemporary sense, they're climate change. you can't beat those forces. You can only figure out how to live with them and hope they don't step on you. You know, and that theme just recurs and recurs and recurs. And that's whether it's in Japanese movies or whether it's in British movies or uh, Korean movies, you somehow figure out how to live with it. You don't defeat it. Which
So
is where the ones that get
they
it
get it
wrong.
really wrong. Yeah.
Which I think is kind of, it does take you back to Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, where you've got that ambivalence about science, where, yeah, bad science has made a monster and unleashed a monster on the world, but there's good science to fix it. And there's faith in science, but from Gajira 54, which I suppose it's worth remembering that end monologue is delivered by Takashi Shimura from Ikiru, the kind of wonderful crossover of studio filmmaking. Um, you can't beat this thing. You've either got to live with it. It's just going to come back again and again and again. Um, so there's something fantastical, a real kind of wish fulfillment that you can actually beat these giant creatures.
So I'm going to take a film from the filmography, and this is a film that I feel lots of kaiju fans really enjoy. If you're a Godzilla fan, you've definitely seen it, and you definitely at least loved it when it came out. And it is very Japanese in tone, and it goes out of its way to demonstrate that other films with characters were not the legitimate article. So Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, Monsters All Out Attack, or GMK, as it is often shortened to, that film has so many Japanese cultural concepts in it. And even in its main plot devices, Godzilla is a creature possessed, empowered, a vessel for all of the people who died on the Pacific Front
Yeah.
during World War II, who were, I guess it depends on which translation you get, but they're either not remembered or they're not feeling the respect as spirits. So Godzilla is almost like a borderline yokai monster. And you have guardian beings, which I still feel robbed that we didn't get Varan in that film, but Ghidorah does look awesome. But that film, for me, as it has gone around the globe, I remember seeing that film, and for at least a decade, I was like, you want to watch a Godzilla film for the first time, you want a unique concept, watch GMK, because that's one of the best ones that's come out. So how would that rank and tie in with transnationalist viewpoints? Like, how did that one work? Because it's one of the better reviewed ones, I feel.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I think this is why I don't talk about those movies a lot.
But
Like you say, that's a very specific national historical origin. It's kind
everybody
of the
loved it.
other equivalents for the, we can all relate to the bomb. We can't necessarily relate um, to those left behind in the same way.
Yeah. So my thought process is, though, like, as a Midwestern American, I loved it. And like I remember buying like copies for my friends, and they were like, "This is amazing. Are all Godzilla movies like this?" So like there was something in that again, it was the Japanese kaiju concept in whatever mutated form it took in that film, pardon the pun. It definitely like came forward, and at least it reached my Midwestern town, and I know that it reached others. Like, there are lots of fans of GMK,
Yeah.
and I feel like even though it is so Japanese, it went across the divide,
Mm.
and it went across the divide more so than Final Wars, which is definitely transnationalism, because you can see Independence Day in that film, you can see The Matrix in that film. It was trying to be so many different things, but that film, I don't think it got. I mean, like that again. Like this is probably where it gets into an interesting argument. Did it fail because it was aiming for a transnational audience, trying to encompass too many things?
There's research that tells us that actually some of the most portable movies that are not from Hollywood or from kind of some of the bigger centers of filmmaking travel best the more kind of nationally specific they are.
So that would be like your GMK example.
Certainly. That seem more distinctive. I guess a term like exotic would be the case. Yeah, Final Wars as a big kind of mashup, like you say, referencing global movies, doesn't necessarily land quite as well.
Is that the correct term? Referencing? Is that the scholarly term?
Referencing intertextuality.
Intertextual. Oh, nice, nice. Not ripping off.
No, no. Homage.
Homage. Oh, these great terms. This is wonderful jargon that we're learning tonight. So we're going to end on that lovely note. The book is Transnational Kaiju, or Exploitation, Globalization, and Cult Monster Movies by Dr. Steve Rawle. It is available on Amazon. I have personally read it. It is fantastic. It gives you a unique perspective on kaiju films. I have an actual library, shelves full of kaiju books. None of them have approached the topic like this, so I give it a very hearty recommend. I'm going to be writing a review up on our website, ukkaiju.com. You're welcome to look at that. Is it available now, Steve?
It's available now. Yeah, it's been out for about 2 months.
All right, so it is available now. It is an academic text. It is long. It has images. It has references. It is fantastic in that sense. However, you pay for quality. So now is the time to go asking friends and relations if there's a certain holiday coming up. By all means, this is your plug. But yes, it is definitely a 5-star from myself, and it is. You will learn something reading it. You will see films which you have no doubt seen before if you're a fan of the genre, and you will see them through new eyes. So, again, hearty recommendation. So, Steve, I've totally just stolen your thunder and your recommendation there. However, at the end of our podcast, we normally give recommendations on what fans of the genre can pursue if they've enjoyed this podcast, or if, like, say, they enjoy your book. What would you recommend on a further note to what we've talked about tonight? Is there anything, any piece of media or story thing that they can check out?
That is a great question. Um, Probably something your listeners know, which I got into totally in the research, is just how deeply kaiju runs through Marvel Comics. I
Yes,
find
it
myself
does.
in my mid 40s starting to read comics again. Through the Monsters Unleashed series, Kid Kaiju, Elsa Bloodstone has kind of appeared in the MCU. It's probably an unusual thing to talk about, having a very academic book to plug. But getting back into comics was great for me, and the Deadpool Monstropolis series is terrific.
All right, there we go.
Spider-Man talking about kaiju um, was a really great discovery in putting this book together.
As a non, I've read Marvel comics, but let's just say I haven't read those ones. Is Spider-Man a fan? Spider-Man a fan of kaiju?
Uh,
Not when they're in his city.
Ambivalent. Let's say ambivalent.
Oh,
When he
Spidey, come
has
on,
when he has to fight them, no.
man. Peter just never gets a break.
No.
Oh, well. Anyways, folks, please check out the book. A review will post later. And as always, thanks for listening and keep it kaiju.